Hello everybody, my name is Matt Maccaux and I'm with Dell EMC. I am responsible for our big data consulting practice. And today I'm going to talk about anti-patterns. So you've probably heard a bunch about best practices. The gentleman from VMware just before us was talking about best practices to deploy Hadoop and big data technologies on VMware. I'm going to talk about the things you shouldn't do, and you may recognize some of these in your enterprise. And so before we do that, we need to set the context, because when we talk about big data, there's certain things that come to mind. I'm sure you all have an idea of what we mean about big data. To set the context, there are really two models that we need to think about when we talk about big data. The first is what we call exploratory analytics. And exploratory analytics is essentially what the data scientists and analysts do day in and day out. They explore the data, they build algorithms, they refine the data. It's usually done in a batch type mode, and it's usually done over very, very large data sets. So that's what we call exploratory analytics. The second mode for big data, or the second model, is operationalization, and that's a word that we made up. Operationalization is essentially what you do when you're done exploring. When you're done exploring, you've built a report, you've built an algorithm, you need to build applications. When you operationalize that, that essentially means you need to put it in production so that it's useful to people. It's generally a different type of data set. It might be streaming, and there's different applications. I guess the way of thinking about these is, this is when you hit the system at petabyte scale. This is how you build the application that runs on your cell phone. We're going to talk about anti-patterns for exploratory analytics. So before you raise up your hand and start yelling at me for examples of where this is not true, remember that this is exploratory analytics. So let's talk about the first anti-pattern. The first anti-pattern is what we call too much Hadoop, and you probably think we're going to get lynched for doing that, saying that at this show. But essentially, too much Hadoop means an organization that is embarking on their big data journey thinks about their organization in terms of departments. And those departments start deploying Hadoop. You get a cluster going, and then you add a node, and you add a node, and you add another node. And then the next department goes, hey, that seems pretty cool. I want to spin up a cluster. And then the next department says, hey, I want to spin up a cluster. Well, the only problem with doing that, and this is very easy, right? You get bare metal commodity servers, you scale out infinitely. The only problem with that is that when you've got lots of different clusters, you end up with lots of different silos of data. And this is problematic for a couple reasons. One, you're copying data across these various clusters. So you've got duplicate data in these clusters across the enterprise. That's expensive. If you're an infrastructure vendor, you might like that. If you're a software vendor, you might like that. But in terms of efficiency for your enterprise, that's not such a good thing. Secondly, if I need to query across all of these clusters, there's probably different security profiles, and it's really inefficient to do so. So for exploratory analytics, what we recommend is, wherever possible, combine all of your data into one single cluster that users can access. That's the first anti-pattern, and it makes me sad. The second anti-pattern is what we call too much governance. And too much governance goes something like this. The organization has decided to build out that one pristine data lake. They've put all the data ingest jobs into place. You've got all of your data in one place. And then comes along your users, your data scientists, your analysts, your data engineers, and they say, hey, I really want to get access to that lake. But in order for me to do my job as a data scientist, I need to bring my own data. I want to use the latest version of the tools. And the IT team goes, wait a minute, you want to ingest data into my lake? Absolutely not. And so we see this across many organizations, these very pristine data lakes where nobody is provided access, or one user at a time is provided access for that exploratory analytics use case. So when you apply too much governance in place, you end up with really inefficient use of your resources. The third anti-pattern is exactly the opposite of that. Organizations that say, you know what, everybody should just have free reign on the data lake. We're not going to control anything. We're not going to filter anything. And think of this as a busy intersection, where you've got all of your users, all of the data, all flowing into the lake with no traffic signs, and everyone just says, go. So the 4 V's, and I guess there's more V's now, but the 4 V's of big data are volume, variety, velocity, veracity. If you throw all of your data into the lake without any sort of controls and cleansing and governance, the veracity, or how much you can trust the data, goes way, way down. And there's nuances and there's areas in between this, but this is an important one to think about. The fourth anti-pattern is very similar to the first one. As we deploy big data and Hadoop throughout the enterprise, we tend to do so a server at a time. Right? We get our commodity servers. As the amount of data goes up, as the amount of users and the applications that go up, we keep adding these servers. And this is fine to a point. But eventually, we're going to reach a scalability and performance threshold where for every terabyte of data that's added in here, we have to create, well, 3x copies of that if we want the resiliency, and it becomes very inefficient to manage. It becomes very expensive, and many organizations early on in their big data deployments become storage bound. This becomes very problematic because if you need to do patches and updates and add users to this, it's really, really cumbersome. And if you're asking yourself if I built this PowerPoint slide, yes, I did, one little line at a time. The other problem with this for exploratory analytics is when we reach the petabyte scale lake, when we've got direct attached storage, it becomes, again, very, very inefficient to do that. And that makes me sad. The idea, and if you were here for the VMware session previously where we talked about scale out network attached storage architectures, when you get to that petabyte scale, it now starts to make sense to think about decoupling your storage from your compute so you can scale those tiers independently for exploratory analytics, right? This is not the operationalization where you might have architectures where you're putting things in memory, et cetera. This is for the exploring use cases. The last anti-pattern is what we call pet projects. And again, this is for sort of early adopters of big data technology where an IT team traditionally is looking to explore the latest in technology, whether it's Hadoop or Spark or TensorFlow, and they say, hey, I want to go build a data lake. But I think I'm going to build it sort of based on the use cases for IT. So I'm going to take some files from my Exchange server, maybe from my networking switches, and I'm going to try and build algorithms that can predict when Exchange is going to fail. And then they do that, they maybe come up with a few % of efficiency on that, and they turn around to the business and they say, hey, look, we've got this great technology that you, the business, should use. And the business goes, what's a VDI? I don't know what any of this is. This sort of mentality of, if you build it, they will come, is a really, really bad way to start. And so our recommendation, and that makes the kitty sad, where we recommend you start with any sort of major technology adoptions, and it's not just for big data or Hadoop, is engage the business on their use cases, right? Talk to the business about their use cases so you can design the system and make sure they're involved early from the get-go so you don't have adoption problems. So what's the best practice? Well, we've got this thing that we call the Elastic Data Platform, and if you want to learn a little bit more, come to booth 521, or come to our session where Barclays will be speaking about their deployment of the Elastic Data Platform tomorrow from 1:15 to 1:55, room 1A03, where Bala from Barclays, the managing director for big data at Barclays, is going to speak about how they've implemented the Elastic Data Platform. They've containerized, using Docker images, their compute environment. They've decoupled their storage to provide analytical self-service to both their data scientists and their business analysts. So that's it.